They called it the cradle of civilization, a land of fertile plains and winding rivers, of hallowed temples and towering ziggurats. Yet deep beneath the veneer of greatness lay a thirst for conquest and a relentless hunger for domination. This was Assyria, the mightiest military power of its age. From its beginnings as a small city-state perched on the banks of the Tigris, Assyria transformed itself into a war machine that for centuries dictated the fates of empires, kingdoms, and nomadic tribes alike. This is the story of how a once unremarkable settlement rose to become feared far and wide, known among many ancient peoples as the first empire of evil. Ashur, the city that bore the empire's name, was home to a fierce and cunning population. They paid homage to the god Ashur, who demanded unwavering devotion and offered victory in battle as reward. The citizens believed they were chosen to rule, destined to expand outward and bring their enemies to heel. Surrounded by precarious frontiers, flanked by rival Mesopotamian city-states, threatened by mountain tribes, and overshadowed by Elamites and Babylonians, the Assyrians learned early on that the key to their survival was a disciplined army and a fearsome reputation. Within those fortified walls, a martial culture began to take shape, founded on loyalty to their king, pride in their war god, and a willingness to shed blood without hesitation. In the earliest days, the Assyrian kings were content to hold on to their home region and drive away invaders. They built formidable walls and cunning defenses, ensuring no foe crossed their borders unchallenged. Yet, as the city grew wealthier, ambition tugged at the hearts of its rulers. They longed for new lands, exotic riches, and the homage of conquered peoples. Gradually, raiding parties were dispatched, forging deeper into neighboring territories. Those first plundering expeditions returned with spoils of war, gold, silver, precious stones, and enslaved captives forced into heavy labor to build up Assyria's monuments. These successes convinced the populace that their war god had bestowed upon them a sacred right to conquer. One of the earliest formidable kings of Assyria was Shamshi-Adad I, who turned his gaze across Mesopotamia's rivers and plains, forging alliances while subduing those who refused diplomacy. He bolstered fortresses along trade routes, establishing the empire's first rudimentary administrative system. Under his rule, military specialists were trained not only in open battle, but also in siegecraft, ambush tactics, and the use of fear as a weapon. By attacking swiftly and brutally, the Assyrian army left such terror in their wake that resistance often collapsed before a single sword was drawn. A savage reputation became both shield and sword. Generations came and went, bringing to the throne kings of varying skill and temperament. Some were content to maintain the borders. Others saw the chance to push further. The driving force behind Assyrian expansion was an unbreakable synergy of religious fervor, economic need, and the central authority of the king, who was often revered as the embodiment of Ashur's divine will. Tribute poured in from conquered peoples: grain, livestock, metals, and above all, labor. With these resources, the Assyrians built roads and irrigation systems to feed their growing cities. Armies swelled, bureaucratic officials fanned out, ensuring each new territory paid what was owed or faced swift punishment. But for all their cunning, the Assyrians did not march unopposed. Ancient Babylon stood to the south as a rival, proud of its storied heritage. The fierce tribes of the Zagros Mountains, the Aramaeans in the west, and the influential city-states of the Levant refused to bend easily. Warfare was a constant, And it was in these battles that the Assyrians refined their brutality. They adopted iron weaponry, advanced siege engines, and a battlefield discipline unknown among many of their adversaries. The empire's soldiers fought with a ferocity that belied their smaller numbers. They were hardened by rigorous training and a sense of divine mission. Each campaign etched a new tale of terror in the annals of history. A new era dawned when kings such as Tiglath-Pileser III and Sargon II emerged. Under Tiglath-Pileser III, the kingdom was reorganized from within. He centralized authority, personally oversaw taxation, and meticulously arranged the empire's territories into provinces controlled by loyal governors. This administrative overhaul would prove essential. It allowed a single man to control a land that stretched hundreds of miles from the foothills of Anatolia to the deserts near Egypt. The cruel efficiency of the system became legendary. No rebellious city could hide behind distance or obscure terrain. The Assyrian king's hand reached everywhere, and so the empire marched on into Syria, Phoenicia, Israel, and even the fringes of Egypt's domain. The method was always the same. Approach the enemy city, demand submission and tribute. If the local ruler refused, the Assyrians deployed rams, siege towers, and scaling ladders. They dug tunnels beneath city walls, set them aflame, and battered them until defenders either surrendered or perished. Conquered populations were uprooted from their homes and deported across the empire, broken apart as a social unit to prevent future uprisings. The cruelty that accompanied these campaigns was not unique in the ancient world, but few matched the cold, systematic approach employed by Assyria. Tales of flayed rebels, mass executions, and cities burned to ash spread across the region. Terror proved a potent deterrent. Many cities surrendered rather than suffer unspeakable reprisals. Amid this constant warfare, grand architectural projects transformed the empire's heartland. Nimrud, Kalhu, and Nineveh blossomed into dazzling centers of power. Grand palaces rose along the Tigris, adorned with intricate bas-reliefs depicting military victories, religious rituals, and the king's divine calling. Immense libraries collected clay tablets from across Mesopotamia, storing knowledge of medicine, astronomy, and literature, including the Epic of Gilgamesh. Scholars from conquered lands were brought to the royal court, contributing their expertise. The steel spine of the empire might have been cruelty, but at its core, the Assyrians were also patrons of architecture, art, and scholarship, ever eager to proclaim their grandeur to the known world. Sargon II, named after the ancient Akkadian ruler Sargon the Great, sought to emulate his namesake's conquests. He moved the capital to Dur-Sharrukin, or the Fortress of Sargon, constructing a new city from the ground up. Beyond simply desiring a display of wealth and power, Sargon II aspired to create an imperial center that would surpass anything seen before. Lumber, stone, and precious metals flooded in from every corner of the empire. Walls soared into the sky, wide enough for chariots to ride along their tops. Sculpted lamassu, colossal winged bulls with human heads, stood guard at the gates. Within the throne room, scribes recorded the glories of every campaign, embedding them into clay tablets to be read by future generations. But even the mightiest of conquerors could not escape challenges to their power. Sargon II's reign, though fruitful, was not without rebellion. In lands far to the west, Phoenician city-states intermittently rose against taxes and enforced tribute. The rugged highlands of Urartu, dotted with fortresses perched atop cliffs, refused to bow to the empire's demands. Sargon II led fierce campaigns in mountainous terrain, braving harsh winters and ambushes that tested the resilience of the Assyrian soldiers. Countless men fell in the swirling snows, but the empire endured. Year after year, discipline and superior equipment gave Assyria the edge. One by one, rebellious cities were crushed, their leaders tortured or paraded in chains, their populations scattered to distant corners of the empire. Upon Sargon II's death, the throne passed to his son, Sennacherib, a king whose name would become infamous not only among foreigners, but even among his own people. Sennacherib swiftly asserted his authority, leading massive armies to quell unrest. He famously clashed with King Hezekiah of Judah, a small kingdom that dared defy Assyria by withholding tribute. The biblical accounts describe the terror of the Assyrian army at Jerusalem's walls, the psychological warfare they employed, and the divine intervention some believed spared the city from total destruction. Yet for every city that resisted Sennacherib and survived, a dozen others were obliterated. The spoils of war funded ambitious building projects in Nineveh, which he transformed into an even more resplendent capital than Dur-Sharrukin. There, at his new palace, he erected reliefs depicting the sacking of Lachish, an eternal visual record of the empire's ruthlessness. The Assyrian war machine was an interconnected system of roads, fortified outposts, supply depots, and specialized troops. Charioteers with spoked wheels thundered across plains. Archers and spearmen advanced in tight formation, while engineers devised new ways to breach city defenses. The empire's cavalry grew more sophisticated, drilling in both ranged and melee tactics. A vast intelligence network scouted enemy territories, monitoring political shifts and alliances. Skilled administrators ensured a steady flow of resources from conquered territories, feeding the needs of the ever-expanding military. Those who resisted recognized they faced not just an army, but an entire civilization honed for perpetual war. Over time, seeds of ambition flowered into an empire that stretched across Mesopotamia and the Levant, up to the mountains of Anatolia, and as far as the borders of Egypt. Yet, controlling such a vast domain proved a Herculean challenge. Internal struggles for the throne erupted when kings died or were deemed weak. Provincial governors, many of whom commanded local garrisons, occasionally attempted to seize power or declare independence. Revolts flared among resentful populations forcibly uprooted from their homelands. The harsh climate of certain regions, coupled with scarce resources, placed financial strain on the empire's administrative might. Each year demanded new campaigns to suppress revolts and gather tribute. The empire was caught in a cycle of relentless conquest simply to sustain itself. Amid these tumultuous years, a new ruler arose, Esarhaddon. He sought to stabilize Assyria and secure the empire's borders by forging strategic alliances. Instead of relying solely on terror, he embarked on public works and reconstruction efforts in the newly conquered territories. Temples were rebuilt, roads repaired, and city walls strengthened. Strategic marriages were arranged to keep potential rivals at bay. Yet Esarhaddon, despite his more conciliatory stance, did not abandon the iron fist. He famously marched into Egypt, capturing Memphis, proclaiming himself pharaoh of a new dominion. The triumph was short-lived. Local rebellions swiftly harried Assyrian garrisons, and the empire's presence in Egypt remained tenuous at best. With the throne passing to Esarhaddon's son, Ashurbanipal, the empire reached its zenith. Under Ashurbanipal, the famous Library of Nineveh was expanded, gathering tablets from across the region to create one of history's earliest great archives. Scholars flocked to the Assyrian court, and scribes recorded everything from administrative documents to epic sagas. Ashurbanipal's literacy distinguished him from many of his predecessors. He boasted of being able to read several languages, even arcane Sumerian texts. Yet no amount of cultural refinement tempered the empire's appetite for war. Under his command, campaigns were launched into Elam, effectively crippling that region's capacity to challenge Assyrian power ever again. The riches gleaned from these endeavors were funneled into Nineveh, culminating in colossal palaces and temples. The empire's heartland glittered with the wealth of countless subjugated peoples, but beneath the polished surface, cracks began to form. The strain of near-constant warfare exhausted the empire's resources. Elite soldiers perished in distant lands, leaving behind a power vacuum filled by mercenaries or less experienced recruits. Ambitious generals, fresh from foreign campaigns, sometimes questioned the central authority. Meanwhile, the conquered provinces grew bolder in their discontent. The battered lands of Babylonia seethed with centuries of resentment, longing to restore their independence. Neighboring powers, once cowed by Assyrian might, quietly recovered their strength, forging alliances with each other to dethrone the so-called unstoppable juggernaut. After Ashurbanipal's death, the empire's final unsteady years were plagued by civil war among his heirs. Factions arose, each vying for supremacy. The Babylonian revolt proved especially devastating. Led by Nabopolassar, Babylonians combined forces with the Medes, a rising power from the eastern mountains. Together, they targeted Assyria's heartland. City after city fell. Nimrud was ravaged, Dur-Sharrukin abandoned. The once mighty capital, Nineveh, was besieged by the allied armies. Despite a desperate defense, the walls of Nineveh were breached. The city was sacked in a cataclysm of fire and slaughter. The empire's last breath came in a series of frantic rearguard actions by Assyrian loyalists who fled westward to Haran, trying in vain to rally an army. Their pleas for help from former vassals went unanswered. The tide had turned. Those who once trembled at the mention of Assyria now saw their chance for retribution. The empire fragmented, and the proud standard of the war god Ashur fell beneath the unstoppable wave of enemy forces. In the ruins of Nineveh, victors and treasure-seekers alike peeled gold from palace walls, looting the lavish decorations and burning the archives. Many tablets from the royal library were forever lost. Yet a surprising number survived, buried under collapsed walls, preserving an echo of the empire's knowledge for future ages to discover. The world the Assyrians had dominated for centuries moved on, shifting power centers as new empires rose and fell. Babylon ascended, then gave way to Persia, Greece, and Rome, each leaving their own mark upon history. Despite the centuries that separate us from the Assyrian Empire, the echoes of their conquests still shape our understanding of power, cruelty, and the cyclical nature of empires. Archaeologists and historians, poring over cuneiform tablets and stone reliefs, piece together tales of ruthless campaigns, sophisticated statecraft, and unmatched cultural achievements. For many in antiquity, Assyria was the epitome of tyranny, justifiably or not. Like a colossal shadow across Mesopotamia, their legacy haunts the stories of exiled peoples and sacked cities, but also testifies to the ancient world's capacity for resilience, adaptation, and survival. Were the Assyrians the first empire of evil, or merely the rightful inheritors of an age-old pattern of conquest? There is no easy answer. What remains undeniable is that few realms have forged a legacy as fearsome and dramatic. They leveraged might and fear to carve out an extensive empire, imposing their will on countless nations. They built colossal cities, erected statues to their gods, compiled the knowledge of their world, and spread cultural influences even amid their brutality. In doing so, they sparked the admiration and enmity of entire civilizations. For centuries, the very name Assyria became synonymous with unstoppable armies and pitiless conquest, an identity they nurtured, embraced, and wielded like a sword. Within the fires of their downfall lay a final lesson. No fortress is unassailable, no dynasty eternal. The Assyrians, once so convinced of their divine right to rule, saw their proud capitals burn. The unstoppable war machine ground to a halt as resources withered and foreign powers capitalized on internal strife. That collapse stands as a stark reminder that no throne, no matter how intimidating, can remain immune to time, misfortune, and the changing tides of human ambition. They had lived by the sword for centuries, and in the end, perished beneath the weight of their own violence. Still, the magnitude of their achievements remains awe-inspiring. From the earliest kings who fought to protect a humble city on the Tigris, to the imperial colossus that marched across the Middle East, Assyria shaped the world's political and cultural landscape for generations. Their innovations in military organization, siege technology, and governance influenced subsequent empires. The deportation policies that so notoriously broke the spirit of conquered peoples had a lasting impact on the demography and collective memory of the Near East. Their literature and scholarship, preserved in the royal libraries, bridged the knowledge of Sumer and Akkad into later ages. In the eyes of neighboring peoples, Israelites, Arameans, Phoenicians, Elamites, and countless others, Assyria loomed as both predator and teacher. They taught the harsh lessons of survival in a world perpetually at war, and in doing so fueled the impetus for alliances, improved fortifications, and cunning diplomacy. The synergy between oppression and opportunity defined the empire's story, shaping the destinies of those who struggled under its yoke. Even in its final days, the empire's fall was not a quiet surrender, but a cataclysmic reckoning that reshaped geopolitics across the region. Those who overcame Assyria emerged, changed themselves, for toppling a giant often requires one to adopt certain methods of that same giant. When the dust finally settled over the shattered gates of Nineveh, the ancient world recognized a pivotal shift had occurred. Babylon gained its short-lived ascendancy, while the Medes consolidated power. Across the Levant, city-states seized moments of relative freedom, though new masters would soon follow. The legend of Assyria rippled onward, kept alive in oral traditions, biblical texts, Greek historians, and the stone carvings discovered millennia later by modern explorers. Each retelling became part cautionary tale, part marvel at what humankind, guided by ambition and faith, can achieve. Countless battles, alliances, betrayals, and rebuilding efforts compose the tapestry of Assyrian history, enough to fill libraries and stir the imaginations of poets. We can only stand in awe, wondering at the thousands of lives that toiled to raise gigantic palace walls, the soldiers who marched under the scorching sun, and the scribes who quietly inscribed the empire's greatness on clay tablets. Whether we brand them as a force of evil or as a civilization that harnessed the only method of survival they knew in a brutal age, their story resonates with us centuries later, because the pursuit of power and the desire for security remain universal themes in human history. The empire's darkness is balanced, to some degree, by its intellectual and cultural pursuits. While inscriptions boast of flayed rebels and enslaved populations, they also preserve mathematics, astronomy, and some of the earliest medical texts. The god Ashur demanded loyalty, but the empire also venerated other deities, absorbing spiritual influences from neighboring lands. This cultural cross-pollination, ironically, is one of the empire's lasting gifts. The records they kept, the knowledge they assimilated, and the languages they preserved formed an intellectual bridge between the ancient civilizations of Sumer, Babylon, and the broader world. History rarely offers neat moral judgments, especially for civilizations of antiquity shaped by ceaseless warfare. The ancient Near East was a crucible of states battling over farmland, trade routes, and pride. Assyria rose higher and sustained its conquests longer than many of its rivals precisely because it excelled in the ways of war and administration. They refined fear into a political tool, balancing severe punishments with strategic assimilation. Their kings often believed their power was not only justified, but divinely sanctioned, a belief that fueled unstoppable momentum for centuries. In the final summation, we return to that burning question. Why did the empire so widely earn the title evil? Perhaps the simplest answer lies in the extent of its success. Every ancient power employed cruelty, but the Assyrians perfected it to a scale and efficiency that dwarfed that of their contemporaries. Their army was unstoppable for generations, employing cutting-edge siege technologies, bridging rivers with pontoon boats, and stamping out rebellion with ruthless speed. Their deportation system, so methodically executed, aimed to break cultural identities, sow fear, and discourage future resistance. The stories of wanton destruction and merciless punishment spread from city to city, carried by refugees and whispered in the hushed corners of foreign courts. Yet, their saga illuminates more than just atrocity. It reveals the complexities of human ambition, the interplay of faith and politics, and the illusions of permanence that accompany great power. Empires come and go, and each believes itself exceptional, favored by gods or destiny. Assyria was no different. At its zenith, it must have seemed impregnable, destined to rule Mesopotamia indefinitely. But the seeds of its downfall were sown in the very apparatus that made it formidable. A sprawling bureaucracy prone to corruption, a war machine that demanded constant expansion, a ruling class susceptible to intrigue and civil war, and subject peoples bound together only by fear. When Nineveh's walls fell, it was not merely the end of an era, it was the triumph of a coalition of subjugated states seeking revenge for centuries of oppression. The city's downfall symbolized the fragility of even the greatest empire when faced with united enemies and internal discord. And while cities can be razed and royal families destroyed, ideas and cultural legacies often outlive their creators. Thus, amid the ashes, the knowledge housed in Assyrian libraries and the administrative techniques they pioneered found new life in emerging powers. Echoes of the empire's achievements, as well as its darkest cruelties, were woven into the next tapestry of civilizations that succeeded it. Even now, stone carvings of Assyrian kings brandishing bows, leading chariots, and subduing lions captivate modern audiences in museums. These depictions, at once fearsome and majestic, remind us how intimately empire and spectacle were linked. The public art was propaganda. Each relief told a story of divine kingly power, unstoppable armies, and the righteous vengeance meted out on rebels and outsiders. To the ancient viewer, these images hammered home the message, "Resist at your peril." To the modern observer, they serve as silent witnesses to a civilization that soared to unmatched heights through war, only to be consumed by it. In the shadow of these carved monuments, we can reflect on the cyclical nature of empires. rising, flourishing, declining, and falling, all in the same unstoppable tide of human ambition. Assyria was neither the first nor the last to be branded as cruel, nor the only one to claim the favor of the gods for its expansions. Still, its legacy stands out for the sheer intensity of the terror it inspired and the administrative brilliance that sustained its rule. The scars left on the ancient Near East influenced the political contours for generations, shaping dynasties and belief systems from the Nile to the Persian Gulf. Thus ends the saga of Assyria, the first empire of evil, as some would name it, a conqueror and unifier, a destroyer and preserver. The echoes of its name rumble across the millennia as testament to the duality of human civilization. We innovate, we conquer, we create beauty, and we inflict suffering. All these truths coexisted in the hearts of the Assyrian people, just as they dwell in our own modern societies. Whether we choose to see them as villains or simply the product of an unforgiving era, the story of Assyria reveals a facet of the human condition, our boundless capacity for greatness and our tragic propensity for violence. In those dust-laden ruins by the Tigris, the lessons remain for those willing to listen, a testament to the heights we can reach and the depths to which we can fall.